This is how to be a great board member. My name is Tim Francis. The first board meeting I ever went to, I was scared stiff. I had never written a board report before. I'd never been in a board meeting before. In fact, I had never even shown my financials to other entrepreneurs. I was absolutely terrified. Since then, I've been a part of over 150 board meetings. I've been both a panelist as well as a chairman, as well as in the hot seat. So all three positions in a board meeting. I've helped save over 11 companies from bankruptcy. On at least 14 occasions, I've helped companies find over $100,000 in free cash in under 90 days. That's not $100,000 of revenue or profit or cash. Even better, it's $100,000 of free cash in under 90 days. I've since become a sought-after advisor to privately held companies, sometimes in private one-on-one work, sometimes to their leadership, sometimes in board meetings. Every corpse on Mount Everest was once an extremely motivated person. This is an incredible quote. Again, every corpse on Mount Everest was once an extremely motivated person. Here's the thing. When we start our businesses, motivation, determination, throw it against the wall, see what sticks, screw it, let's do it, are oftentimes really powerful ideas to live by. The idea that money loves speed and massive action is the name of the game. That is usually pretty helpful in the beginning of any campaign, project, or the beginning of an entire business. Here's the thing though. Once your business gets to a certain size, now all of a sudden, defense matters. It's necessary to avoid the big mistakes because years of hard work to build a bank account to say $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 can be wiped out with one wrong move. I know in my life, there's single decisions I've made that have led to $100,000 plus errors, and it is pretty sad to think about had I just avoided that one decision and done nothing. Had I literally sat in my mom's basement and played Halo, I would literally be hundreds of thousands of dollars richer. But instead, no, I had to go live by the run and gun lifestyle of a startup entrepreneur, only to make some pretty devastating mistakes along the way. So when we are at the lower levels of the 5 levels of 80-20, we're down here in the skill territory. It's low risk, low reward, low leverage, low consequence. Great time for massive action. Great time to throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. But if we're up here and we're now making CEO and investor level decisions, it's high risk, high reward, high leverage, high consequence. It's oftentimes way harder to undo things, and the pain is a lot heavier because it affects a lot more people. And so this is the environment of measure twice, cut once, maybe even measure thrice, cut once. So we need to know which level of 80-20 we're operating in at any given time. And when it comes to a board meeting, we are not in the massive action zone. We are in the measure thrice, cut once zone, where defense matters just as much as offense. Friendly reminder that your business, no matter how big or how small it is composed of 3 main parts that make up your profit factory. We've got acquisition, that's how we get customers. There's fulfillment, how we fulfill on the promises that we've made. And then mothership, finance, legal, HR, that kind of thing. Each engine room is going to have an engineer, so a person who leads that engine room. Now in a smaller business, you might be the engineer for multiple engine rooms. We have engines, so these are going to be process or functions inside of each engine room, and then dials, that's going to be our metrics. Our goal as CEOs is to carefully shepherd the time, energy, money, and skill going into the business, wiring up our profit factory and designing and defining and delegating to our various team members everything that needs to happen in our profit factory so that we can make true progress according to the only 4 true progress metrics that truly matter. 1, free cash. 2, market value equity. 3 is what's called internal fulfillment. So that's like how happy are you? And 4 is external contribution. What difference are you making for others? And we need to build and navigate all of this not in a vacuum because we do not exist in a vacuum. We exist in an environment, and our environment is affected by elections and regulations and public health. Just think of the COVID-19 pandemic. Supply chain issues, automation changes, AI, internet, currency, commodities, competition. We do not exist in a vacuum. So we have to, as CEOs and investors, make our decisions with a keen eye towards the environment that we are in. And it's our ability to find that cross-section of what time, energy, money, and skill do we have given the environment that we're in, such that we need to build our profit factor in a particular way to generate the ideal collection of true progress metrics here on the backside. So with all that in mind, let's talk about what we're going to get from this little training right now. You're going to get the following outcomes. Number one, you're going to learn how to be a great board member. What are you going to learn? You're going to learn how to prep for a board meeting, how to set a context for a board meeting, how to participate powerfully on the board, and then how to participate powerfully in the hot seat in the board. In terms of assignments that might come out of this, I won't teach you in this session how to write a board report, but writing a board report would come out of this. Reading the board reports of other participants, if you are, in fact, kind of on the panel, if you will. And then from there, participating with full presence whenever your board meeting does come. Letting the world know I'm in deep work for these coming 2 to 3 days. So how do you prepare for a board meeting? First of all, seems obvious, we need to write an excellent board report. Again, I'm not going to teach it to you in this training, but that definitely is a major part of preparing very, very well for a board meeting. Secondly, though, is actually reading all the other board reports where you might be on the panel for someone else who's having their hot seat. And you want to read all those other board reports at least 48 hours in advance so that you can generate early thoughts and first-line questions so you can show up ready to be a great board member. Lastly, you do want to let everyone in your life know, your significant other, your kids, your staff, anyone in your life, that more or less you're off the grid for the entirety of the 2 to 3 days of your board meeting days. What do I mean by setting the context of the meeting? It's essentially setting the agenda, so being very clear right from the first morning of the first day of board meetings on when are we going to be in meeting, and then also when are we going to have breaks. I think at the very, very beginning of a board meeting, it's good to establish ground rules, especially around confidentiality. Also, confirming that everyone's prepared to participate fully the whole time. No one's like ducking out or coming in or leaving for certain parts. We're fully committed, fully present for the full time. If we're on Zoom, perhaps we agree that everyone's cameras are on the whole time, which really creates that sense of like, okay, everyone is here, everyone is present, everyone is focused. I think to kick off any great board meeting session, it's good to remind ourselves of our core values. At Profit Factor, our core values are to be accountable and transparent, show people we care, pursue mastery and growth, and then ensure all-way workability. Having those at the front and center, right from the very first minute of our board meetings, is a real nice way to have a great container to work in. So what does it mean to be on the board, or let's say to be a panelist during someone else's hot seat? I'm going to tell you a story about Justin. Justin was a member of our board program a handful of years ago, and when his hot seat came about, he was unbelievably excited to tell us all about the new customer journey project he had in mind. He was absolutely certain this was what his business needed to tackle next because he just read a book and he was feeling super inspired. One of our board members asked a very, very good question. They said, okay, Justin, so what makes you believe this customer journey project is your top priority? And Justin said, oh, well, I read this book and it really, really made a ton of sense. We got to do it. So the next question from the same panelist was, okay, how can we get numbers around the situation? So Justin said, well, I've got about 100 customers. And so then that same panelist said, okay, how many are still with you? And Justin said, 98. And so then I piped up and said, okay, well, what happened to the 2 that are not renewing with you each year? And he said, well, 1 retired and 1 died. So I said, okay, so Justin, you're telling me of 100 customers, 98 are renewing year in, year out. And in this last year, the 2 that did not renew is because they couldn't renew, because 1 retired and 1 died. So basically, you have 98 successful renewals of 98 customers. Is that right? He said, yes. I said, okay, so I have my doubts that specifically customer satisfaction is a problem because you have 100% retention. So what's your goal behind the goal of doing this customer journey project? He said, well, I need to improve profit. So that opened up a whole different conversation, a whole different direction. And what he landed on by the end of his hot seat time was that actually his customer journey wasn't what he needed to focus on. What he needed to focus on was actually improving his pricing. If he's got 98 happy customers who are happy enough to be continuing year in, year out, that's a 100% retention rate, then he probably has an opportunity to adjust prices. And that's exactly what he did. He adjusted prices. He adjusted his offer a little bit so that it looked like his customers were getting more value for the price increase. And he lost no clients along the way, and it dramatically improved the profitability of his company. Thank goodness he didn't do the customer journey project. So let's talk about the boardroom mindset. A problem well-defined is half solved. That's from Charles Kettering, who is a former inventor and engineer at General Motors. And a problem well-defined is half solved is our kind of, let's say, North Star, if you will, as panelists in a board meeting. So what is the boardroom mindset? Overall, it's important that you're asking way more questions than you are giving answers. Masterminds and other peer groups that are not at the level of a board meeting typically kind of devolve into just an ideagasm of marketing ideas or sales tactics. And it's all, and typically in a mastermind, it's all around revenue. And people are just throwing out, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. And it's just this like blizzard of marketing and sales ideas. That's not what we're doing at the CEO level, and that is not what we're doing in the boardroom. In the boardroom, a problem well-defined is half solved, and so we need to be asking more questions than offering answers. We're likely going to engage in a lot of assumption checking, where as panelists, we're asking the person in the hot seat, what causes you to know that? How can we get numbers around that? Those kinds of questions to check the assumptions that entrepreneur is bringing into their hot seat. It really is more like how Michelangelo referred to sculpting as the process of chipping away unnecessary pieces to reveal the bust that's always been there. That's what problem solving inside of a boardroom is more like. It is less like, hey, here's a blank canvas and we're going to throw a bunch of paint on it and what kind of fireworks can we make up? That's not CEO level, and that is not boardroom level. That might be mastermind level, but that is not CEO level. That is not mastermind level. So we want to be less blank canvas and more Michelangelo revealing the sculpture. Now, our job is not to be optimistic, to believe everything can work, not to be pessimistic, saying nothing can work, but rather skeptical. It's kind of like a trust but verify energy that we want to bring to the conversation. At the board level, core issues are rarely we need more clients or we need more money. We have to push beyond that. Number of customers we've got, number of dollars in the bank, revenue level, all that, those are way lagging metrics. We need to push beyond that. We need to go to the core and find what is the issue behind the issue to find what's really needing to be addressed. In my 150 plus board meetings, I will tell you there are 3 common core issues that come up probably more than anything else. And the first is actually people issues. So if I don't like how much revenue my business has, then I could ask myself, okay, what people are missing in my business that I need to hire, or what people are present that I need to fire, or which people are present that I need to train, or I need to give better resources. Like maybe they need a peer group, or maybe they need a plan, or maybe I need to just hold them accountable to hitting certain numbers. Maybe they don't know what their numbers are and they need access to better metrics. People is oftentimes, I might even venture to say the single biggest core issue is there's someone who doesn't know how to do their job, or they're not willing to do their job, or they're too overwhelmed to do their job, or they don't know what their job is. Something in that territory is oftentimes a core issue that's 2 to 3 layers below. My revenue's too low. I have too few clients. My bank account isn't working. A second core issue is oftentimes an issue with courage. Some kind of courageous conversation or courageous decision has not been made yet. And that could be with ourselves, and that could be with others. In my own life, I look at how it's been kind of a never-ending series of moments of surrender in my business to say, okay, business, what do you need from me next? And that's required me to have some courageous conversations, to part ways with projects or clients or sometimes entire businesses. It's required myself to be really honest to say, you know what, I'm not that good at this one thing, or you know what, I'm playing small. I'm not stepping up to the plate. And even at times saying, you know what, if I'm being honest, I'm treating my business as a lifestyle business, not a performance business. And what I really want is a performance business. So I'm going to have to really say no to a lot more things and go way deeper on these few areas. And that's scary. That is scary to think that I'm going to cut off other options and decide to go deep on fewer options, maybe even just one option. That kind of courage is oftentimes courage is oftentimes what's missing at the core. And that could be, again, with ourselves, with others, and that could be conversations, that could be decisions. Another common core issue that's kind of related to number 2 is some kind of self-deception. Not realizing that we have a blind spot or not being totally candid with ourselves. A really great question right now is, what am I pretending not to know? What am I pretending not to know about why my bank account is too small, about why I don't have enough clients, about why my revenue is too low, or why revenue's been flat? What am I pretending not to know? Oftentimes, these 3 areas, people, courage, and self-deception, are common core issues. I'm not saying they're the only 3, but I'd say probably the most common 3 that I've seen in my 150 board meetings. And it seems to often come back to this no matter what a person says. If a person says, I don't have enough money, or I'm afraid about competitors, or I am fighting with my business partner, or whatever, it oftentimes comes back to one or many of these 3. So what are some pro boardroom questions you can ask to help the person in the hot seat get to whatever the core issue is? Some really good questions to check in for, and this is probably the one I've said more than anything else, is what are we solving for? What are we solving for? What are we solving for? Like in the example a few minutes ago, Justin, who was keeping 98 out of 98 of his clients, when he wanted to do the customer journey project, and we said, well, what are we solving for? And he said, well, I guess customer satisfaction. And we said, okay, well, how would you measure customer satisfaction? He said, well, I guess my retention rate. And we said, well, what's your retention rate? And he said, 100%. We said, is it really a problem then? Right? So that question of what are we solving for is incredibly helpful to help us focus and refocus and better focus the conversation as it's going on. And it really helps us get out of this meandering land of opinions and I don't know this and I'm not too clear of that, to really honing in. Another really good CEO level question is, how do we get numbers around this? I gave you an example of that just moments ago with our friend Justin. Next up is, what assumptions do we have? What assumptions do we have? And sometimes the CEO who's in the hot seat, they actually can't see their own assumptions, or else they'd be able to point to them. And so sometimes as board members, we need to ask questions that might bring some of those blind spots into focus. And that might come down to, like, the entrepreneur, they assume that something is too risky, or they have a limiting belief. And sometimes we have to ask some questions to bring those to the surface. Another good question is oftentimes, how can we get both and instead of either or? Oftentimes we end up in a thinking pattern where we go, well, geez, I want to focus on writing a book, but I don't know how I'm going to find the time for it. And so it's kind of like I can either or, right? I can do the book, or I can run my business as is. Instead, a good provocative question is, how can you get both and? How can we get you to write a book while still being able to run your business every day the way that you are? And oftentimes that's a very, very good way to get an entrepreneur back into a productive mindset. Next up. Now this is, I didn't come up with this. In fact, I don't remember who came up with it. If I can remember, I'll be sure to let you know later. There's something called the 5 whys. Just look it up on Google if you need to quote it or anything. And it's this nifty kind of brain hack. It doesn't work all the time, but it's this kind of mental trick where if you ask why 5 times in a row, you oftentimes can get to the root issue. So for example, if an entrepreneur says, well, I just don't have the time to do more marketing and sales, you can say, okay, why is that? It's like, oh, well, I'm spending all day doing coaching calls. Well, why is that? Well, I'm doing all these coaching calls for my 2 different businesses. Okay, why is that? Well, I guess I have 2 businesses on the go and I'm kind of maxed out, kind of doing everything for 2 different companies. Okay, so then why is that? Why don't you have, why are you so exhausted with 2 companies? And why do you even have 2 companies? Well, I have 2 companies because I just don't believe that this, one can have enough margin for me. Okay, and why do you believe it has, can't, like having just one business wouldn't work and the margin wouldn't be there? It's like, oh, well, I guess I've never really done a margin analysis of like, or do some kind of creative thinking around what would have to be true to double my prices in the first business such that I don't need the second business. Okay. So we're missing a financial model. Got it. Go build that financial model and let's see if that allows your brain to relax to now having just one business. If we've got just one business, now, in fact, we can spend a lot more marketing, and look at that. What if we had a lot more marketing on a business with twice the margin? That would be a pretty amazing outcome, wouldn't it? So those aren't the only provocative questions, but those are a good sampling you can play with in a board meeting to just see what that produces for you. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the 7 steps to CEO strategy. So more or less, this is roughly the path I'm taking an entrepreneur through, especially if I'm the chairman of the board and I'm leading the meeting. And so it goes like this. 1, we got to get clear on where do we want to arrive, by when, and on what metric. Are we trying to increase sales, cash, profit, customer satisfaction? Like, what is it? Time frame really matters. Like, if I were to say to you right now, I need you to make me an extra $1 million in the next 10 years, you might be like, oh, great, I'm just going to carry on. If I say, okay, I need that same $1 million in the next year, you might go, ooh, okay, that's spicy. I got to find an extra $1 million in the next year. I probably need to launch something new, a new campaign, a new product, new something. And I said, okay, great. What if I need you to get me $1 million in the next month? You might go like, oh man, I don't think I can do that unless I like acquire another company or, I raise money or something like that, sell some equity. And if I said, okay, I need you to get me $1 million in the next hour, you're probably going to pick the richest uncle or mentor that you know of, and you're going to call them with like an emergency request, right? So nothing's changed. It's the same $1 million, but all I changed was the time frame. And look how much your strategy changed, right? So we want to get really clear on where do we want to arrive, by when, and on what metric. So a friendly reminder that the 4 true progress metrics ultimately we're going for are free cash, market value equity, internal fulfillment, and external contribution. Now, once you know what that increment is, maybe I want to see free cash go up by $50,000 in the next 90 days. Then from there, we may back it out and say, okay, what are some revenue strategies, or how can we reduce expenses, or how can we decommit to cash intensive projects we were thinking about in the next quarter? It could be any number of strategies, but that kind of end point is going to address probably one of these 4. And we want to know which of these 4 endpoints are we looking to address. Once we know that, the second question is, where are we today on that exact same metric? So, if I'm looking to improve cash by $50,000 and let's say I want to get to 100K, then, that means today I'm at 50, right? And so if I want to get to 100K free cash, I'm at 50K free cash, then now that helps me know exactly this third point, which is what is the increment that I'm solving for. So I'm solving for $50,000, and it might be in the next 3 months. On the screen here, I've got free cash up by $25,000 in the next 3 months. So that's a slightly different example. And so I'm very clear in the increment, and I'm very clear in the time frame. Now we know what we are solving for. So now that we know what we're solving for, next we want to ask, okay, so what's the problem behind the problem of why we haven't reached this yet? So if the problem is free cash is too low, what is the problem behind that problem? Now, we might say, well, we have too few clients, or we're spending too much money on on advertising, or we're spending too much money on overhead. Whatever that is, let's identify that, and then we want to figure out how to get numbers around the situation. So if we have a lot of customers who are really mad, then maybe we need to ask ourselves, what are our NPS numbers, our Net Promoter System? If you haven't done NPS, maybe you can survey your customers to try and get some of that data. Now, keep in mind, sales, profit, cash, customer satisfaction, those are all lagging indicators. So we do want to make sure that we've properly identified the leading indicators. Maybe it's, our CEO is our main salesperson, but our CEO is too busy doing other things. His calendar is slammed. There's no openings in his calendar, and that's why we're not getting any sales calls. But people want to book in with them, but they just can't, right? So I want to get clear on what are the numbers around the situation, and then what are the leading root causes that are leading to those numbers. Okay, so those are the first 4 steps. Step 5, whatever that core issue is, what are 3 options to solve it? What are 3 options to solve it? the worst bargaining position to be in is when you have only one option, right? Like when the pandemic was hit and there's only one person who sold masks and gloves and rubbing alcohol. If there's only one vendor, then we're screwed because we have to pay whatever price they want to command from us, right? Whereas if we could generate three options, then we're able to negotiate much more freely amongst the three. We can get more creative. Likewise, for us, when we're doing CEO thinking in the boardroom, we want to push our thinking to what are three different options that could help solve this core issue. And sometimes it's really helpful to say, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What's the second thing that comes to mind? And then maybe think something totally wild and wacky, something you've never done before, never thought before. And that can sometimes stretch our thinking. So once we get three options to solve the core issue, then at that point, we can start working on those options. That last little kind of mental model I got was from a guy named Blair Dunkley. And when he's generating options, he says, what could you do? What else could you do? And what is something radically different that you've typically wouldn't do or haven't tried before that could also be an option. So once we've got our three options or more, for the record, you could do 4 or 5 options. That's when I recommend you use a decision-making matrix to find the best solution. Some criteria you might use in that decision-making matrix are certainty of success, size of return on investment, speed to ROI, simplicity, maybe even minimal CEO effort. So just recently I was doing a decision-making matrix on myself alongside my director of operations. And one of our criteria was whatever the strategies we choose needs minimal CEO effort, minimal input from me so that I could stay free and available to do business development, right? To build relationships with and possible referral partners and take some sales calls and all the rest. So I'm not saying these are the criteria you should use. These are just some sample criteria. In this training, I'm not going to do a full training on how to use a decision-making matrix, but it is something that we bring into the boardroom regularly. 7th step on the CEO strategy, what engines need to be started, stopped, and or edited. Remember, we had our drawing at the start of the presentation today on your profit factory, right? So we've got 3 engine rooms, acquisition, fulfillment, and mothership. And inside each of those engine rooms, there's engines, right? So an example of an engine in my company, my hiring company, I own a company called Great Assistant. One is my signature talk that I give. Another is how do we get on stages? Another is what is my discovery call that I have? Another is what is my handoff process to my team? Those are all engines inside of the acquisition engine room. So the question becomes, once we know what the core issue is, which is step 5, step 6, we figure out what the best solution is to make our increment. Then tactically, we need to ask ourselves, what engines need to be started, stopped, or edited in acquisition, fulfillment, and or mothership? And unpacking that further, what is the increment on that in the coming 90 days? And then that's what ends up becoming some of our rocks or priorities for the coming quarter. So in summary, here are the 7 steps to CEO strategy. Where do we want to arrive? By when? What metric? Where are we today on that same metric? What is the increment and time frame we're solving for? What's the problem behind the problem of why we haven't reached this yet? What are 3 options to solve this core issue? Use the decision-making matrix to find the best solution. And then what engines need to be started, stopped, or edited in the coming 90 days. Now, what about if you're in the hot seat? If you are in the hot seat, all of this still applies. We still want to be coming from the place of a problem well-defined is half solved, more questions than answers, all of that. We want to come from that same place. A few tips, though, here for if you are the one who's in the hot seat. If you're going to be effective, you might quite possibly win or lose the value of your entire board, your time in the board hot seat based on how you prepare. I've been in too many board meetings where someone's traveled sometimes thousands of miles to be in a board meeting that we host here in Austin. And lo and behold, we spend their whole time, which could be an hour and a half, 2 hours of time. We may spend the entire time just trying to even figure out what the metrics are or what their board report is even saying. Like, I remember preparing for this one board session, and the day before, I was reading their financials, and I couldn't make sense of it for the life of me. Nothing was adding up. It didn't seem to make sense for their business type, but it was the financials that they submitted. So, here I had this very kind of like long list of confusion points with some really kind of basic questions like, how is this even, like, is your accountant even accredited? Because this isn't even making any sense, right? And I come to find out the next day when I start the hot seat with this particular entrepreneur that, oh no, those weren't really their financials. Those were just sample financials for like a business of their type. And I was just like, oh my God, you can't be serious. So now I had no opportunity to actually do any kind of financial analysis ahead of time. So I wasn't prepared with the right questions. Secondly, we're now all in Austin, Texas, and we're all doing this board session, and we don't even have the data. We don't have any financials for them because, yes, the financials they gave were not real financials, but we also still had the problem. We don't have their real financials. So like we were just so hamstrung. It was like grinding at the maximum to even try to have an effective meeting. Furthermore, if someone is writing a really, really half-assed board report, it's like we just end up asking a zillion questions and the person in the hot seat just ends up saying, I don't know, right? Like if I'm asking a question like, what are the leading metrics for the last 90 days for your sales team? And the entrepreneur didn't pull that data and didn't put it in their board report. How do I know if their sales team is the problem or not? Maybe it's not their sales team that's leading to low sales. Maybe it's that they're getting bad leads, or maybe it's that their funnels aren't converting, or maybe they are getting good leads and their sales process is very good and they're closing, but the problem is onboarding, that clients are getting onboarded too slowly, right? And so it's just like, it's kind of like trying to look at a human body and guess what's wrong with it without having x-rays or MRIs or blood work or any other testing mechanisms to gather information and data and background kind of context. So when you put great effort into writing a great board report, there's two magical things that happen. One, you're preparing others so that they can be prepared to help you in return. Makes a world of difference. Now here's the other thing it does for you. It actually prepares you at a level that you would not imagine. I've oftentimes heard that reading and learning is collecting the dots, but writing, being forced to synthesize our thoughts into the written form, is connecting the dots. And that's what writing a board report does for you personally. It's a forcing function to cause you to have to pull data and say, ooh, I hadn't thought about that. Ooh, I should pull that information. Ooh, I should get that sales report. Ooh, I should talk to my director of operations and ask them what they think the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are of the business. And ooh, I should pull that customer satisfaction data to see how happy are our customers. It's such a great forcing function to cause us to grab that background data so that we're ready and then present it, prepare it, and make connections in our minds that therefore the board report has given us tremendous value and we haven't even set foot into the board meeting yet. How cool is that? Now, when you are in the hot seat, you have submitted your board report and it's now time to shine. My top recommendation to you is to be curious, not defensive. Be curious, not defensive. I'd also recommend that you speak as little as possible. If someone asks you a question, answer in the fewest words as possible and try to do it in like under 10 seconds every time. If it's got to be a little bit longer, so be it. But under 10 seconds for all your answers gives you the maximum odds of your time being spent with the collective minds of the room rather than you sitting there storytelling or defending or explaining. It doesn't help anyone. It's a huge energy drain. Be curious, not defensive. Focus on listening. Keep your answers to 10 seconds or less, if at all possible. Okay, next up, being effective in the hot seat is also about having good expectations. I'm going to tell you right now, it's pretty rare that a board meeting happens and the person in the hot seat exits with a single tactic or some fully developed strategy. Oftentimes, they're exiting with a short homework list of things to research and a different perspective, oftentimes exiting with a few more questions than answers, but that's okay. That's okay because now that we've identified what those questions are that need to be solved, has been the bottleneck up until this point. And so now the entrepreneur knows where to go, investigate, solve, and guess what? Now the entrepreneur is back in the driver's seat, knows what they need to go do next. Now, one other pro tip here is I do recommend that you think about, if the group is okay with you recording your hot seat, ask for permission to record your session. If they're cool with it, that gives you an opportunity to listen back to it once you're on the plane flying home or whatever the case may be. So getting a recording of your hot seat session, usually if the group is fully in agreement with it, because maybe some panelists aren't okay with it, but if they are okay with it, recording has been very helpful for me in my time in board meetings. So here's a few final wrap up and a few final thoughts and pieces. So what we've covered today, here's the learnings. You learned how to prep for a board meeting, how to set the right context at the start of a board meeting. If you're not the chairman, you probably don't need to worry about that, but it's something you could suggest to the group if in fact they're open to it, or maybe you're a more veteran member of your board. You also learned today how to participate powerfully on the board as a panelist, and then also how to participate powerfully in the hot seat. So what do you do now? I actually recommend you subscribe to the Truth and Mastery newsletter. It's a newsletter that I write every week, and it gives great ideas around entrepreneurship, great ideas around true progress in business, not just increasing revenue. I've seen too many businesses where revenue grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, but profits get worse and worse and worse. And literally I've watched businesses sell themselves into bankruptcy. There's such thing as growing broke. That is not a speech impediment. Growing broke is a real thing, and that's to be avoided. And it's like if all you're doing is thinking about sales all the time, that's not being CEO responsible. That's being maybe chief revenue responsible, but that's not being chief executive officer responsible. So truth and mastery is all about what is the truth and mastery of entrepreneurship and to a degree investing. And as it pertains to being CEO level responsible, where you're looking at the entirety of the company, not just throwing touchdowns, but the whole thing, offense, defense, winning games, winning championships, all the things, all the way up to being like the owner of the sports team. Truth and Mastery is all about that, as well as my own personal philosophy around personal growth as it pertains to entrepreneurship. The other next action you can take, if you're curious of being in board of advisors, email tim@profitfactory.com, that's me, to see if you would qualify for one of our upcoming board programs. So that brings to conclusion how to be a great board member. My name is Tim Francis from Profit Factory. Thank you for your time today.